For this episode of Shadowscast, possibly a short one, we have two segments on Korea. One for the Korean Thanksgiving, and one for something that might not sound exciting when you first talk about it, immigration, entry permits, and work permits. Wow. It's October, and this is Shadowscast 8. All of that translates into a Halloween segment. You are so very lucky. Well, although it looks like a very sunny, summery day, it's the very end of September in the solar calendar, and in the lunar calendar, it's the Harvest Moon Festival. So there'll be an enormous full moon tonight, which my phone camera here is not capable of capturing in its glory. And what's going on around me is a whole lot of nothing. All right. Basically across the country right now, just like for Thanksgiving for us in North America, almost everybody goes home for the holiday. And the city in which I'm living now is one of those towns to which people go. And so as you can see on the street behind me, what would normally be full of people and empty of cars, other than cars driving, a lot of parked cars. And this is going to continue to fill up as the day goes on, as people arrive from mostly Seoul. As it's getting close to half the population now lives in Seoul, or around Seoul. And so this holiday season, the highways, which are incredibly well organized and multi-lane affairs with speed limits of 110 kph, you can actually walk faster than you can drive on them right now. And people will come filtering in to their hometowns from as early as 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Some of them will leave on Thursday night, and some on Friday, and so it goes. And it's an interesting time. So, when I first came to Korea in '97, Seoul, which at that time had 10 million people living in the city proper, well, it would just empty, literally empty. You would feel like you were in a ghost town. And if any of you watch The Walking Dead, it would be very much like that. The very few people that you met would be almost desperate for hungry to consume your company. But now, with so many families living in Seoul, it doesn't feel that way anymore. Now that I've moved to Daejeon, I'm reminded of those days. Because literally all my neighbors in my building, which is behind me, all my neighbors are gone. And all these people you see on the street behind you, well, they're going off to visit their relatives or whatever. The actual holiday is tomorrow. That's the night of the full moon, and will basically be a lot of eating, sleeping, and watching TV for the locals. Some family restaurants will be open in the evening, some bars will be open in the evening for the young people to escape from their families and go to movies or go out drinking. But for the most part, people stay at home with their families, giving the streets a very deserted feel. Wide boulevards that are designed for the heavy traffic that happens normally will be clogged with cars parked, and really nothing will be going on and nothing will be moving. And it's a very interesting time to take advantage of from a gaming point of view. I like horror as a storytelling medium. I don't tend to read it. I don't tend to go to horror movies, but I really enjoy when my role-playing group manages to scare the crap out of themselves through a story that I've facilitated. As I've mentioned in the past, my first truly successful, truly enjoyable games, 100% involvement from me, 100% of satisfaction from me and from the players came about through Call of Cthulhu. And that has shaped much of the years that followed. So as it's October, you might expect me to be pitching some kind of how to run horror segment for the October Shadowscast. But I don't want to. I don't tend to run horror games around Halloween. And the reason why is not that it's becoming cliche, or because Joss Whedon pointed out that the vampires stay home and are bored on that day. It's really because, in my opinion, a key point of the players being able to reach that stage where horror or terror or fear can happen, a key component of that is that they don't know it's coming. And if it's Halloween, they expect it. So why give it to them? Scare the crap out of them, or enable them to scare the crap out of themselves at a different period of time. What I do like to use Halloween for, and I've mentioned this on the blog, on Casting Shadows before, is retrospectives. Use it as your metaphorical 13th at the table, right? It's Thanksgiving. Set the table for one more person than you expect to arrive, and entertain the opportunity that the ghosts of the past will come by and share some stories. Or you can share stories about them. Arrange it so that your campaign, which has been ongoing, takes a breather, looks back over where it's been. You might do this just by taking your players and going out for a drink, or going out for dinner, not actually playing, just engaging in all the gamer talk. But you can do it in character. Return to a place where the characters had a significant impact, and see how they have improved things for those people. Or, if you're doing some kind of evil campaign, show what despair they dwell in because of the fearsome badness of your crew of malcontents. Whatever. But let your campaign take on the added layer of authenticity of a past. And do it for Halloween.
This is a bonus segment for Shadowscast Episode 8, and this is part of our series on immersion. Now, just as a recap, we're not talking about the type of immersion you'd expect on stage. We're talking about normal immersion from a simulationist point of view, wherein, once play starts, characters are expressed by the players as I do something, I do this, I do that, I want this, I want that, and where they are referred to as their character by the other players, right? So I give it to Ferdinand the Flatulent, or I take the sword from Lodak the Barbarian and stick it in Wonderfutz the Magician. It's not that hard, but in a way it is a little hard. The appearance of the character as this is a good sign that your game is going in an immersive direction. When the player starts saying they're engaged, they're enjoying themselves, and they're allowing the line between themselves and the piece of paper to blur. Right. Dave the accountant disappears, and Davor of the axe, get the reference? They blend together and become one, at least for a while. But Davor of the axe and Dave the accountant are sitting at a table, or at least Dave is sitting at a table, but Davor is just a piece of paper. And his friend Bob, sitting next to him, likes to say Dave's character. So Bob isn't immersed so much in Dave's character as he is in his own. Bob will say, I do this, I do that, and Dave's character is going to do something, or I'm going to give it to Dave's character. It's easier to say so-and-so's character than it is to remember the names. And just like any good business meeting or relationship, names are important. This might seem obvious, but this happens all the time, and it's one of the big barriers to a reasonable level of immersion around the table. Remembering someone's character's name, remembering their occupation. You walk into a town that you visit regularly, and you have the option of saying Ivan, meaning the innkeeper, or you could say the innkeeper, or you could say, you know, that guy that we met, the one at the inn. The less attachment that you form, the less information, realistic information that you use when you're communicating in character, the less in character you are. It never has to get to the point where you're wearing a funny hat, you're speaking in accents, and prancing around the room with props. But immersion, just through something as simple as saying I, by using your fellow player's character's name in character while you're playing, that can take you into a realm where, when you're telling the story later, it really feels like you were involved. And the stories are so much more poignant and effective for all of that. Something to consider in October.
Okay, so here we are at a hub of activity. This is a combination shopping mall, bookstore, Cineplex, and the central bus terminal for the region. So all the buses, airport buses, regional buses, what have you, come through here. It's a very, very busy place, pretty much 24 hours a day. You can see behind me the ubiquitous Golden Arches, some coffee shops and the like. Across the street there are wedding shops and love motels, including the Wedding Cult. But today, for this installment of Shadowscast, we're talking about being a foreigner, visas, work visas and entry visas. And Korea, unlike many nations, has a very, very organized system of issuing entry permits and work permits and spousal marriage permits. But the implementation can sometimes be flawed. Now, many people who visit Korea do so as English teachers of one kind or another, and they come in under a specific visa, which requires them to have medical tests, blood tests, swear an affidavit that they are of basically good character, don't use drugs, and aren't carrying any sexual diseases, as well as not having any major communicable diseases like tuberculosis. And they also need to sensibly verify all their documents according to international law, unlike how it was through most of the 80s and 90s, where a photocopy of a diploma was enough to get you a job. So there's that. This is one of the most stringent applications of the immigration law in the entire roster. So if you come in basically to be a prostitute, you need to apply under the entertainment visa, which is easy to get. If you come in to teach English and share some culture, you basically have to be bent over the doctor's table and spend hours and hours and days in line to get a series of documents to prove your worth and authenticity. Enough about visas. I'm on a regular street now, and the bright lights you see way in the distance behind me, those are the the lights of the bus terminal and Cineplex I was at just a few moments ago. This particular junction in which I'm standing is the ideal spot to talk about neighborhoods. The organization of neighborhoods can sometimes produce some interesting mixtures of types, just like they can in any other nation. But often here, those different types also demonstrate a distinct period of history. So you might find small two-story buildings, such as you see behind me, filling an entire neighborhood, right? And then abutting them, you'll find skyscraping apartment buildings, right? Like the 20-story monster that's just behind them. And then, like I said, at the end of the street, you'll find a massive commercial complex, all within a 1-minute walk of each other. Directly behind me, another one of those ubiquitous scrap yards that I mentioned. If you're using Korea as a location, then dealing with visas is not exactly the most exciting use of your time that you could come up with. But dealing with the Department of Immigration and a little bit of Korean culture might provide you with an entertainment opportunity. Characters might encounter this at the airport or at a seaport, depending on what kind of period or setting you're using. But Korean culture often revolves around seniority. Now, this is typically connected to age. Almost always connected to age the further you go back in the past. But essentially, the senior person makes the decisions and has all the ideas. So the junior people need to support the senior person. They need to provide that person with correct information in a timely fashion so that good decisions can be made. It's really no different than how things are organized in any other group. There has to be a decision maker, and the people who support the decision maker need to function as a team under that person. People who are encountering the decision-making process and realizing that it's being made by the senior person can often become hung up on the fact that this is an age-based system rather than a meritocracy or some other form of determining who's in charge. No matter how you slice it, somebody has to be in charge. So that cultural blindness or that particular hang-up that the visitor has, because believe me, things happen in Korea and they happen fast. So there really isn't anything wrong with the decision process. You just might not agree with the decision or the person who made it. And it becomes very easy to make an excuse out of that old guy made a bad decision rather than dealing with the problem. So there's a lot of potential conflict there that you can harvest to use in your games. Particularly in a high-tension situation like, do you get into or out of the country? And how do you get in and out of the country? Is it in chains? Yeah. So, keeping that in mind, immigration can be useful from a storytelling perspective. Now, a lot of the visas are simple. You're coming in to study, you're coming in to work at a particular job that a local person cannot do for some reason. You're coming in as an investor or financer. You're coming in as a tourist. All of these things have very, very simple requirements. And often, depending on what nation you're from, often you can simply arrive without any kind of pre-arranged entry permit and be stamped and given a period of time, which might be 15 days for some nations, it might be 3 months for other nations, it might be 6 months for some nations, such as Canada. and that entry permit will come with certain perks. And you can play up those differences because not all countries have bothered to work out the same kinds of agreements. So I, as a Canadian, have most of my documents respected at face value, such as my driver's license. I can simply exchange it for a Korean driver's license, and when I return to Canada, I can exchange it back for a Canadian driver's license. If I were American, I could not do that. I would have to take the driver's test. So these little differences. From an employment perspective, not every country receives the same benefits from the taxes that they pay or pay the same taxes. So a lot of these differences can lead to a basis for some kind of conflict in your game, such as misinformation from a person from a specific nation that is not actually a lie. And they just didn't know that your country was different. So for a spy game or an intrigue game, these little details might be important. They make the difference between whether or not you can sneak out on the ferry from Busan to Japan.